Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to our artist talk this evening. My name is Peter Bonfido. I am the gallery director here at the Art Galleries at Austin Community College, and I want to welcome our in-person audience here and also our Zoom audience. And just a reminder that if you're on Zoom, please put questions in the chat, and we will direct those after the talk. I'd like to begin by thanking the tag team, my team, for all of their work putting this event together, also the art department, ADM staff, and especially Olivia Spires and Nicole DiMucci for organizing the event. I want to thank the T-led group for technical support and our sign language interpreters as well. A very special thanks to Kathy Savage from PrintAustin, her staff, and the PrintAustin board for collaborating with us on this project. The Contemporary Print exhibition is currently on view until March 9th. It's right upstairs in Gallery 2000, and the gallery will be open until 7 p.m. tonight if you haven't had a chance to look at it. Please check our website for additional programming related to the Contemporary Print and our upcoming program schedule for the spring, which includes Food, Shelter, Water, an exhibition that will feature 4 Texas photographers, and that exhibition will open next month. So tonight, I want to first of all thank Rashaun Rucker for his efforts in getting here and getting to Austin. He had some flight delays and cancellations, and so I really want to just start off by thanking his efforts for getting here. Rashaun Rucker is a Detroit-based artist and an Emmy Award-winning photojournalist. He is best known for his photographs, prints, and drawings, and has won more than 40 awards for his work. In 2008, he was the first African-American photographer to win Michigan Press Photographer of the Year. Rucker's visual art explores topics such as human rights, mental illness, and the impacts of inequity. His diverse work has been exhibited nationally and is represented in numerous public and private collections. In 2020, he was named a Sustainable Arts Foundation awardee and received an International Studio and Curatorial Program residency in 2021. In the same year, he was awarded a grant for arts in activism from Black Box Press Foundation and the Mellon Residency at the University of Michigan Department of Humanities. And his awards go on and on. It's very impressive, and there are many on his CV. In 2022, Rucker's work was featured in 5 exhibitions across the country, including Never Free to Rest, a solo exhibition at the Arts League Houston. As you all know, Rashaun is this year's juror for PrintAustin's exhibition, The Contemporary Print, which highlights printmaking techniques and innovative approaches to contemporary printmaking. He selected 51 works from hundreds of national and international entries to create a spectacular collection of works in the exhibition. Please join me in welcoming Rashaun Rucker to the stage.
I think I could, okay, it's on. Yeah. Oh, I hate when people read those bios. I'm really just a country boy who loved to draw and print make when it kind of all boils down to it. So what I'll do tonight is I'll talk a little bit about my life, kind of how I got started, talk a little bit about drawing, talk some about printmaking, talk about the Contemporary Print show and my thoughts about being a juror, how I selected the pieces. And when Peter says hundreds, there was hundreds. It was close to 1,000 submissions. So I was not prepared when they were like, can you get it to 50 artists? I was like, oh, sure. And I was like, oh my God, it's almost 1,000. And so it was an honor to do it. As he said, I'm Rashaun Rucker. All my friends call me Ruck. So if you ever hear anybody say Ruck, they're talking about me. From Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is tobacco country. That's why you see cigarettes that are named Winston and Salem, because they're made in that city. Growing up, I was just a kid who loved to be in a room drawing and didn't like to go outside because on hot days, the whole city smelled like a cigarette. So probably why I never smoked in life. if I could give credit to 3 people for like starting me out to be an artist, it would probably be Ric Flair, Thanos from Marvel, and Kathy Williams, who was my middle school art teacher. Ric Flair probably sounds strange, but I loved professional wrestling growing up, and it was a thing in my household. And you know, growing up back then, it was like 2 TVs in the whole house, and the adults ran the TV. And so every Saturday was Mid-South Wrestling or NWA Wrestling, and my grandmother loved Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, and that's what we watched. And I got very enthralled in it as a child, but there was no wrestling toys. And so my mom was like, just draw your own wrestlers. And so my mother was a teacher, and I started drawing Tully Blanchard and Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and all these people, and I would color them, and she would take them to school and laminate them, and they became paper dolls. So I started drawing because I needed to invent toys for myself that didn't exist, because at the point I only had He-Man and G.I. Joe. And then I upgraded to making cardboard and Reynolds wrap wrestling belts for the kids in the neighborhood. So I would cut them out, and they would have a slit, and I would put them through, super glue the foil, and then take a permanent marker and draw on top of the foil and make it a belt, until I got several whoopings about using my grandma's good foil to make belts for kids in the neighborhood. But we would use an old mattress in the backyard, and we would wrestle for those belts every Saturday. And so wrestling played this really pivotal part in me becoming an artist. Thanos, because Infinity Gauntlet, not the movie, but that was literally the first comic book I ever read. I had uncles who took me to comic book stores, and I'm probably one of those people who bought comic books but never really read the stories. I just wanted to see the art. And so my first real thing was literally just copying the art. You know, Jack Kirby, all these people that I love so much, is like just drawing it and copying it. And it also was my first endeavor in being an entrepreneur, where I could get $1 at school for drawing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or some other thing. And also drawing made me the kind of nerdy, chubby kid on the bus cool. It was the one thing I could do to commodify like my skill set and also be cool as people who played sports. Because growing up and you had a sketchbook, you were like the weird kid. Because my family be like, stop being weird and go outside with the other children. And it was literally, I wasn't being weird, I was just drawing, you know, in the back room. And my mother was like, when you were 6 years old, I knew what you're gonna be the rest of your life, because she was like, I would literally come in the room and pry colored pencils out of your hand when you were falling asleep with them in the bed. I also remember getting in trouble because I fell asleep with a bottle of Higgins Super Ink, and it spilled all over the brand new carpet. And it was like the shape of Africa almost in the brand new carpet. And when I went out to college, the Africa shape was still there, because my grandma was like, we're not getting no new carpet. That was your carpet and you ruined it, so you gotta live with it. So I had like ink stained sheets and pillowcases and carpet for like 10 years due to my love of like wanting to draw. And Kathy Williams was the first Black woman teacher I ever had. She was my middle school art teacher. And when I was in the 6th grade, I walked to school in middle school. And it was 2 blocks away. She walked to the house, and she told my mom, she was like, he can be a real artist. And she was like, I'm gonna help him. And she stayed after school with me every day from the 6th grade to the 8th grade, an hour a day, to like help me when she had no reason to do it. She just wanted to help me. And God bless her, we still talk to this day, but she told my high school teacher that I was coming. I was like, is there such thing as a 4-star art recruit? Probably not, but you know, she was like, Rashaun Rucker's coming to your school. He's probably like, who, I don't care about that. So I got to high school, and then Mr. Idol, he did the same thing. He didn't stay out of school with me because Mr. Idol wasn't gonna do that. But what he did was, we had a room with a kiln and clay in it. And so I was in there my freshman year, and I was doing my work. About midway through the school year, I walked into class, and he pointed to the clay room, and I was like, what are you talking about? And I went in there, and he had a little desk in there set up, and he was like, from now on, you do your artwork in here by yourself. And I was like, this is weird, man. Like, why you put me in this room that smell, you know how clay smells, like terrible. Like, you just in a little closet with it. And I was in there, and maybe like a month or two later, I was like, Mr. Idol, why am I in here? And he opened the door and he was like, look at those idiots out there. And it was like kids was like flicking those paper footballs and like doing stuff. And he was like, they don't care about art. You care about art. And he was like, I don't want them around you. He was like, they'll ruin you. And so he started literally teaching me a whole nother art curriculum that I was doing totally different projects than them. And I was like, oh my God, this is great, but it's also a punishment. Thank God another kid got in the closet like 2 years later. I walked in there and I opened the door. I was like, oh my God, there's somebody in here. He ended up going to SCAD, and I was like, thank God. And he was a painter, but I didn't realize at that time. I just thought we were being punished, and we just wanted to hang out with everybody else. But those are the reasons I'm an artist, because somebody just took the time to really not let me fall through the cracks. And the same thing in college. I mean, college is different. I got to college, and I'm telling this story because we're at a college. I was not the best art student. Not talking about technical or skill-wise, I just didn't like to go to class. Because it was the first time where I didn't have an absentee policy and I could just go to class when I wanted to. So I got to school, I was doing my projects. I wasn't failing, I was on the honor roll, but I just wasn't coming to class that often. And then I pledged a fraternity. And then I stopped going to class at all because I just was hanging out with the frat boys in the house, and I'm like, I ain't never going to class. So the dean of the art department, the chair, he came to my dorm room and knocked on the door. And I opened, I was like, Dr. Carver, what are you doing in my? He was like, sit down. He was like, I'm not going to let you fail. He was like, you got 4 classes this semester. You have not been to any classes. He was like, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you an incomplete in every class. You got to start going to the classes starting tomorrow. You will not be graded, but you will go to them and you will do the work. Then you will take the 4 said classes again next semester to get a grade. And he was like, pack up your drawing board, get your paper in your book bag, and walk back to the art building with me. He made me walk back like I was his child all the way to the building. And he was like, if I don't see you in here every day, we're going to have a problem. And so from that point on, I was in there every day. I was in there with the other students. I was doing the studio work. And he really just stayed on me. Him and another professor, Dr. DeBella, who was from Ethiopia. He always called me Chief, which I hated, because I never thought he knew my name. For 4 years, this man called me Chief. Chiefy, go over there and draw. Chiefy, draw. Like, he just was real cold. And then my parents showed up one day because, you know, when you're a student, the only time you get to have a show on campus is when they had a student show. It's like the one chance you get to be in the museum on campus or the gallery. And I had a drawing in there that I liked, and my parents showed up. And he starts talking to my mom. He's like, oh, I like Rashaun. He's an excellent student. I'm like, this dude know my name. Like, he's never said my name before. Like, years went by. I mean, like maybe 5 years ago, I'm in Detroit and I'm at this dinner and I'm talking to somebody, and they were from Ethiopia, and I was telling them about Dr. DeBella and telling them about this story. And he said, in Ethiopia, chief means respect. It's a title of respect. He was like, he had like a real love for you, even though he never once gave me an A in his drawing class, and I was a drawing major. I took like 13 classes with this man, never got an A. Gave me a B every class. And we still talking. I asked him, I said, why don't you ever give me an A? And he was like, it wouldn't have helped you. If I'd have gave you an A, you would have stopped. You would have stopped learning. You would have stopped pushing yourself. You know, so he was always constantly pushing me. He was the first person that told me that I could draw, but that wasn't good enough. Because I bought this drawing in there and I put it up for crit, and I was like, oh, best drawing in the class. It's 20 drawings. I know this is the best drawing. And he just looked at it when it was my turn for crit. He said, so you can draw. He's like, what does it mean? It's like, it don't mean nothing. He's like, it's just a pretty drawing. And he told me, he said, your work is like a birthday cake. It tastes good. It looked good, but there's no nutritional value to it. There's no substance to it. And it was at that point I realized that there had to be like several layers within my work. Like it had to have allegories, it had to have sophistication and all these things, because I was like, wow, somebody just told me I could draw, but that didn't mean anything. But I understood what he was saying. And my biggest regret at that point was we were doing an exchange program. He was going to take a student back to Ethiopia with him to study for a year. And we were going to go to the University of Kumasi in Kumasi, Ghana. And they were going to give us their drawing professor and a student. And he chose me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to Africa for a year. I'm going to study, it's free. Didn't go, because as soon as I told my grandparents, they was like, we ain't got no money, we don't know nobody in Africa. You go over there and get sick, and you can't get back, and I can't get you. And they scared me to the point where I turned it down. And I was like, man, that was kind of the last time I let somebody else's fear derail like my path. Because I was like, they just were talking to me out of their own fear, because they had never been out of North Carolina. I was the first person to leave North Carolina. And I talk about that all the time. My mom is like, I hate when you mention that artist talks, because it makes me feel bad. And I'm like, because sometimes I just be like, I don't know what my art would look like if I would have spent a year in Africa. And it also didn't help that the guy that took my place got malaria. Because my grandma was like, you see what happened? He went over there and he came back. He was like 60 pounds lighter. My grandma was like, Kofi almost died over there. And she was like, you know, we would have never seen you again. So like in my grandma's mind, she was right. My mother apologized, because she was like, I just was scared, and I let my fear hinder what you were doing. And so that's kind of like the basis of how I became an artist. And I'll talk to you about these drawings I've been doing. So I wanted to make some drawings about conditioning, particularly conditioning in Black men. I was trying to figure out how to do it, because I was like, oh, it can't be just pretty, it can't have this, it can't have the regular things you think of. So I needed something different. And I went to visit my friend Tiff Massey, an artist in Detroit, and we were talking. She's a metalsmith, she doesn't draw, she had nothing to do with drawing. It's just, sometimes you meet other artists who are good sounding boards, and we always been good sounding boards for each other. And she said, oh, Ruck, you can do it, but you got to do it in a way that's not been done. She was like, you got to find something else that's marginalized. So for weeks I was thinking, I was like, oh. And so I'm walking to work one day. This time I'm a photojournalist. I was a photojournalist for 20 years before I turned all the way back to art. And I only turned back to art because of my other grandmother. Both my grandmothers were kind of strict women. And my other grandma called me one day, she said, you still drawing? I said, no, not really. I'm focused on my photojournalism. I just won a couple of Emmys. I'm doing really well. I took over the department, blah, blah, blah. And she said, shame you waste God talent. She just hung up the phone. And I was like, I guess I better go to Blick tomorrow and get a sketchbook and start it all up again. And that's what I did. And so I was walking to work, and somebody had spilled popcorn all over the sidewalk. And it was somebody from the Lions game, because our office was close to the stadium. Pigeons all over the sidewalk. And I'm a big guy, and I'm walking, and the pigeons aren't moving. And I'm doing this, and they're still not flying away. They just go like this, and they come right back. And I was like, I hate pigeons. I was like, oh my God. I was like, I bet people hate me just the same way. And so before I started drawing, I started calling myself, I was like, I'm gonna be a bootleg ornithologist. I just started cold calling ornithologists at universities. Didn't even know them, I just started calling them. You got an ornithology department, patch me through, I wanna talk to somebody. And literally like 2 people talked to me. One was a professor at Clemson, and I told him about it, and he started talking to me about pigeons. He said, oh, that's an interesting concept. He said, did you know pigeons came to America at the same time as slaves? I was like, really? He's like, yeah, pigeons aren't native to America. He was like, pigeons are native to Asia, parts of Europe, and parts of Africa. He was like, every pigeon you see in America is feral, just like you, which means you were domesticated and have escaped. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. And I was like, why were they bought here? He was like, oh, in servitude, like easy food source. They could be trained. They could be, they could do service for people. And the more I started thinking about it, I'm like, okay, this fits, like this whole thing. So I started doing more research, and I remember National Geographic, a lot of times when I start research, I look up definitions. I was like, what does National Geographic define a pigeon as? It's like gregarious bird found in large flocks in urban environments. Sound like brothers. I was like, that's exactly what I thought about. I was like, sound like me and my friends. And I just started thinking about that. And so I started making these series of drawings that I call American Ornithology. And it was a compare and contrast between rock pigeons and black men. And some of the men are people I know, and some of them are collages from prison mugshots in Detroit. And so when I think about mass incarceration, the prisons, I think about coops. And the literal word pigeonhole, it comes from that, to be assigned to a strict category. And so I started making these, and this was the first one I made, and it was called Cooped Up. This one is called Code Switch. So when you see this one, this will give you some type of comparison to the size of them. And it was something about, this one's called the East Side Aviary, and this one came about just from having a conversation with a cousin of mine. This one I was saying how like your work takes these deep turns. So one day I was visiting and he was like, what are you gonna do? I said, I'm about to go to lunch. He said, where? I said, P.F. Chang's. So you wanna go? He said, oh yeah. So we get in the car and we drive to P.F. Chang's. P.F. Chang's in the suburbs. We get to the suburbs, like 30 minutes away from Detroit. He's like, where are we at? Like, we're in Livonia. He's like, I never been to Livonia. It's like, dude, you've been living in Detroit for 38 years. You ain't never been to Livonia? He's like, well, I don't belong out here. And I thought about this, and I thought about my family that lived in Detroit, lived on the east side. And I thought about aviaries where birds are kept. And I thought about redlining and how districting work and zoning work and how you put people in places that you don't want them to go outside of. And I was like, he was like, I don't have any reason to be over here. I was like, you don't need no reason. The reason is that you're a person. He was like, how did you find it? I said, I drive where I want to go. I just go to places. It's like, but I thought about all that conditioning, and it's kind of like, when I think about that, I think about Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro book, and you read it, and it's got a phrase there that says, if people continuously go to the back door, at some point you don't have to build a back door, they'll make one for themselves. And it was the same way, and people don't really think about how that locks in. And I was talking to somebody at work one day, and they were like, you don't know how to swim? And they were like aghast that I didn't know how to swim. And they were like, I don't know, I can't believe you don't know how to swim. And I said, well, sit down and let me tell you why I don't know how to swim. I'm from North Carolina. My grandparents couldn't go to swimming pools. They were for white people only. So my grandparents didn't learn. My mama didn't learn because they didn't know. So how was I supposed to learn how to swim? I said, but I got 2 sons. The first thing I did was put them in swimming lessons. Because I remember my grandma told me, she said, you got to put a butt in it. My daddy couldn't butt. And so from that point on, I started putting a butt in every generational curse I could think of in my family or in my community. But she was like, oh my God, I didn't know. And I was like, that's why there's a large percentage of black people who can't swim, because there's no access to it. I was like, that's why there's programs for swimming in inner cities. And I was like, just by way of my grandparents not having access to it, they thought their kids didn't have access to it, so they never made it a point. And then I made it a point because I was so freaked out about not being able to swim because I love to fish. And I was like, man, how am I going to ever really love fishing if I can't ever get off the side just being on the land? You know, I'm looking at everybody get on the boat and I'm terrified to death because I don't really know how to swim. And I was like, I don't want my kids going forward not knowing how to do this. You know, it's kind of like that thing where you see when I'm walking in my neighborhood, and I hate this house, by the way, but there's a house about a block from me. It's got a big German Shepherd, but it's got an invisible fence. First time I walked by, I didn't know it. The dog just came charging toward the corner. And I was like, oh my God, I'm too fat to run away from this dog. And then the dog just stopped right on the edge of the corner. And I saw it and I was like, oh, it's an invisible fence there. And it's kind of the same thing. Like, he's been shocked so many times that mentally he has an invisible border. And it's like when you've been conditioned like that for so long, you start to believe like, this is my stopping point. And so like now I try to remove stopping points, and I tried to do that with these drawings. Like when I showed it to my cousin, he was like, you think I'm a pigeon? I was like, yeah, kinda, like, you know. I was like, but it was just to make a point to not be held like that, to not be put in some category, to not be put in a side of town, to not be, even when I got to Austin today and I was riding in the Uber with the Uber driver, the first thing he tells me is like, yeah, Austin used to be split by this highway. The black people lived over here and the white people lived over. He was giving me this history. Like, I don't know nothing about Austin, but that's what he's telling me. And I was like, very similar to where I grew up in North Carolina. You stayed over here, you stay over here. And it's like, but I learned that if you stayed over in your part, you in food deserts, you in job deserts, you in transportation deserts, like you in all of these places that's very restrictive. And so that's what the drawings were about. And I got to the point where I was like, and the student asked me this earlier, like, how do you do things? I told myself, I do a lot of ideating. I do a lot of preliminary sketches. I draw sketches upon sketches upon sketches upon sketches. So after doing this, I was like, well, what can I do next? And so thinking about the same things, I was like, I got a show in LA that's about this body of work, but I want to make something different for LA because I want to be able to take this grant budget I got and move it differently for my work. So then I started thinking about what I had read about pigeons and how pigeons got almost killed to extinction. And it wasn't by hunting, it was because they were using them for target practice. Until somebody in the 1940s came up with the concept of a clay pigeon. That's why they called the shooting disc clay pigeons. Because at first they would put a real pigeon in a box. The pigeon's trap, he's over here. They call it the trap. Somebody's over there, they open the gate, the pigeon flies, he goes straight to the sky because he thinks what? I'm free. He don't know guy's right here with a shotgun, about to kill him. And so they realize, oh my God, we've almost killed all the pigeons by using them for target practice. And so they start making these clay pigeons. So I was like, what if I made my own clay pigeons? So that's when I started doing a lot more different things. I hit more than I missed. So I was like, I want to make a clay pigeon. I want to draw a face. I want it to be a singular face because I want it to serve as how people sometimes think about our community as a monolith. Like blackness is a spectrum, it's not a monolith, but I want the singular face on this disc. So I drew it, and then I reached out to someone. I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to get it there. So then it went from me, my drawing went from me to an architect who put it in some type of programming with me to help me make a mold, which became a silicone mold. And then I took with myself to a ceramicist, and then we started working on something. And then me and him mixed colors of orange for weeks. I had an orange prison jumpsuit that I wanted it to match exactly. Because when I saw what a clay pigeon looked like when I bought one, it was orange and black. Orange on the top, black on the bottom. And I was like, it reminds me of me and my people in prison suits, black and orange. And then when I realized they're orange because when they shoot them out, you can see orange in the sky. It sticks out. That's the reason they dress people in orange in prison. If you escape, hey, look for a large person with an orange jumpsuit on. You stand out in any environment. And so I think we made 60 clay discs. And I remember the Millen Foundation paid for them. I think it was like 16 grand for the disc. And I remember the lady from the Millen Foundation came to look at them, and she was in there, and I was breaking them, and she was like horrified. I was like, well, this was in a proposal, like that I was gonna break them, and she was like, I thought you were joking, like we didn't think you were gonna really break all this stuff we paid for. So in the installation, it's just 3 on the wall, and the rest are broken. And I only saved a few in case the ones on the wall break some kind of way. And so that's where we came up with this at. And it was, I hit more than I missed. And it's literally talking about, because in the sport, they would say whatever you hit was a kill and whatever you missed was a bird away. And I kind of myself always had this survivor's guilt growing up in my neighborhood in the inner city as a bird away. Because I was like the one person on my street that made it off. Thanks to Ric Flair and Miss Williams, like in my family, I escaped. And I would go home, and still when I go home, all the same people I grew up with live in that street. All the people my age. Whenever I go home, they'd be like, oh man, Ruck, man, he was so smart, he went to college. Not true. I went to college with people who ain't had no business in college and they graduated. I was like, college is about perseverance and learning how to learn and how to critically think. And I would always tell people, the biggest thing you got to do is get out the bed and go to class. As my great grandma would say, if you make one step, he'll make two. Like if you just do the first part of it, a good teacher ain't gonna let you fail. They're not gonna let you come into that classroom and not learn. And I was like, I was no smarter than any of y'all. Y'all were way smarter than me. Y'all just chose to do something different. For some reason in my mind, I was like, I can't live on this street. Because there was generations of people who never left that neighborhood. And I would see them, they'd be like, oh, that's Miss Betty. That's her son. That's her granddaughter. They just all in the same house sitting on the porch waving at me. And I'm like, there's got to be more. There's got to be more out here. I ain't been to a museum yet. I didn't go to a museum until I was in college. I didn't have access to none. The only museum that we had in Winston-Salem was a Renault house. And it was like not really accessible. It was on Wake Forest campus. And they never had artists that looked like me there. I gave a talk there last year, and I told them that. I said, I lived here all my life. It's the first time I've ever been on this campus, and it's because you bought a piece of my work. And so I wanted to share that a little bit, but I just want to get down to some printmaking. Printmaking is my jam. Printmaking is drawing. Printmaking is drawing with a knife to me. I love drawing. Printmaking is just drawing with a knife, and it's drawing backwards. And if you can understand how to draw backwards, you would enjoy printmaking as much as I do. But I think there's something cathartic about printmaking. It's something about reducting something. It's therapeutic to carve out something. I could sit there for days. I have calluses on certain fingers now because the repetition of it. And printmaking was always about my family, and it was always about growing up in the South and about baptisms and cousins. And, most of my printmaking always had something to do, this is my great Uncle June, they always had something to do with my family, always. Because for some reason I separated things. Drawing was about contemporary issues. Printmaking is always about my family and really family narratives. And I love doing monotypes because I want to be a fake painter, but I don't paint. So if you're a printmaker, the most painterly way to print make is to do a monotype. And so that's kind of where that came from in doing that. And that's my same uncle. That's just him old and smoking cigarettes. And I call that cool Uncle June because he was the uncle that had a jerry curl and smoked cigarettes and always gave you $5 when he shook your hand. You know how they slide the little money and be like, how you doing, nephew? And I always knew it was something else in his hand besides his hand. And so he was always like super cool to me. You know, so there are always stories about things. This one's called First and Third, and this was growing up in the summers. I would stay with my great-grandparents, and they lived in a very rural part of North Carolina. And they only went to church on the first and third Sunday because that's all they could afford to pay the preacher. And he preached at another church on the second and fourth. And my grandmother would go all 4 Sundays, and my granddad was like, I ain't traveling with him. I just go to my church. And so it was always about, I think printmaking has just been something that's been about my family mostly. This was like a little different because this was a lino cut that I did in Wayne State University. They just called me out of the blue and was like, it was during COVID, and they were like, we want to have a gallery show, but we can't because of COVID. What if we commission you to make a printmaking piece that would go on a 40-foot billboard downtown? And they were like, just do about whatever you want to do it about. And so this was called Resting in Black, because I did this right after George Floyd got murdered. And that's kind of how I was feeling at the point in time. And so when you would drive down Woodward, the main street, this was like this 40-foot billboard. And they called it Gallery in the Sky. So they would change it out every couple of months with another commissioned artist from all over the country. This is, a narrative about my grandfather's best friend getting lynched. So they've always been like these type of stories. This one is a little different. This is, Peter mentioned mental health. So I spent a year in Detroit documenting the homeless community. So I would just go and hang out with them and draw them like right in front of them, just live and in person, just sit with them and draw. And this was Ricky. And I drew Ricky a few times, but Ricky was the only person I actually made a print out of, like a lino cut. And it was, I started doing that because my oldest son has autism. He's on the spectrum. And one day I saw a man eating out the trash can, and I pulled over to like give him some money and stop him, and he ran away. And I followed him all the way to the homeless shelter. And I was trying to get this guy some money, and he ran off, and I don't know what's going on. And the lady said, oh, that's so-and-so, he doesn't talk, he has autism. And it freaked me out. Because at that point, I realized the only thing between my son and that garbage can was me. And so for the next year, I just did that. I just went around and like talked, drawing pictures of them. Funny because the lady at the bank was like, I saw you on the side of the highway drawing a homeless man the other day. She's like, but you had a church suit on. I was like, yeah, that was me. I was going to church for Easter Sunday, which all Black people do, tend to do it, all people, As my grandma would say, we all go on CME, which is Christmas, Mother Day, and Easter. And so I was going to make my annual homage to church on Easter, and I saw this guy, and I was like, I want to draw him. So I got out, I got my sketchbook, I still had my suit on, started drawing him. I realized, I missed the whole church service. Gave him some money, jumped in the car, went back home, and I was talking to my great aunt, and she told me, I never forget it because I use it all the time. And I told her what happened. She said, you went to church? And she said, folks pass church on the way to church, baby. She was like, that's a building. She was like, you the church. She was like, God would have been doing what you was doing. And so I ended up, I had this big collection of drawings. And I was like, it's okay, but what am I gonna do with these? Like, they're just there. So I ended up taking the drawings back to the homeless people. And I said, I want y'all to write on them, write a journal entry. Tell me about yourself. So I collected them a month later. I mean, they were like pristine. I couldn't believe how pristine they were. And I was like, y'all really took time to do this thing. Like, well, you took the time to draw us. One of them was an apology letter to this guy's kids for stealing their Christmas presents from under the tree to buy drugs. One was an apology letter to their mother for being addicted to opioids and ruining years of their life. One was talking about losing his mind after his son died in a car accident. And so I ended up doing a gallery show with all the drawings and the writings and the show was called Entertaining Angels. And I just donated all the money to the homeless shelter. And the guy was like, man, that $17,000 gonna feed people for the whole year. And I kept one of the drawings. I don't know why I kept it. I was like, I kind of just want to keep it I just want to have something about it, just to commemorate. And so I stayed in touch, and I'm still in touch with the guy who runs Mariners Inn. And he called me one day. He was like, this is like 3 years later. He called me, he's like, whatever happened to that drawing you did of Mike? And I was like, I got it, it's framed, it's in my house, you know. And Mike was the guy who was battling opioid addiction. He was a carpenter who fell off a ladder and hurt his back, got addicted to opioids. And he had wrote the letter to his mom. And he was like, Mike is graduating from sober living after 2 years, and he got his first apartment. I was like, oh, bet, he can have it. So like, we hung it in his house. That was the first piece of artwork he had, was this letter to his mom. And it was, you know, I cry, I get emotional even thinking about it. It's like, I think those are the things I achieve, that I want to achieve with art. Like, you can do so many things with it. And I was telling a student earlier, I was like, you gotta make work from a place of joy, complete joy. If you make it because you're trying to get an institution to buy, if you make it because you're trying to get somebody to buy it, you're gonna end up hating it. Because the first time somebody don't buy it, it's gonna cause a wound. Or the first time an institution don't affirm what you're making, it's gonna cause a wound. And I said, you gotta make it just because you love it. Just because if you don't make it, you won't live. That's how I feel about art. If I don't make, I won't be living. Because that's all I think about is like, what am I gonna make? What am I gonna make? What am I gonna make? And people come to shows and they're like, oh, this show was great. And I'm like, and my girlfriend Ashley always tell me, you don't ever seem excited about the show. I'm like, I don't care about the show. I said, because the show is the residue of my joy. My joy is in the making of the work. The show is for you. It ain't for me. It's for you to come look at it. I hope you get something out of it, but my joy is in the actual process of making what's there. And I think that's like the truest place you can make it from. Because I'm like, if you're waiting on somebody to affirm it, that might not ever happen. You know, I feel like if you make good work, time will tell. It'll reveal itself. You know, time got a way of slow walking you down. That's why you see all these artists and they like, at 85, they struck fame. Or I love when I see like a meteoric rise from artists, blah, blah, I'm reading, I'm like, they 75, this ain't meteoric. They've been making work for 50 years. Like, but in, you know, in people's minds, it's meteoric, you know. And I was doing critiques earlier with some students and I was telling one of the students, I said, I was still showing stuff in coffee shops like 5 years ago. You just never know. You don't know. I said, the stuff that's in the Smithsonian right now was made on my couch. I don't have a studio, never had a studio. Everything I make is on the couch. I now have a desk, you know, that I eat at, watch TV at, draw at, print make at, you know, but I never had a studio. And I think a lot of times students be like, well, I'm not making because I don't have this studio, I don't have this supply. I don't have this tool. I'm like, you the tool. That's an art supply. Because that right there, I pulled that with a Dixie paper plate. I rolled the ink on the paper plate with some speedball ink, and I hand poured it with a spoon. I ain't had a press since I was in college. Everything's been made with a spoon, a doorknob, you know, some type of piece of metal I found at an antique store. They're like, oh, this will work good. You know, it fit my hand. I just think you got to be willing to love it to that extent. You know, I always joke with people in my family and say, don't make me choose between you and art. You might not win. Because I think sometimes I think about it that when my parents got divorced, art was there. When this tragic thing happened, art was there. Like a paper and pencil always been there. If I couldn't get nothing else, I could get a paper and pencil. And it's always been a thing. Whenever I'm in restaurants, I'm drawing on napkins, except with Ashley, because I'm trying to pay attention and be present. But if I'm by myself, I'm normally drawing on napkins. I'm just mind spinning. You got to be creating. You got to be making. And I think that's the thing, like, that I want to especially tell students is like, that's the key. People always like, they always want to ask me, what's the shortcut? Ain't no damn shortcut. It ain't. The shortcut is the work. Like the space between your dreams and all this stuff is the work. That's it. You know, and I tell my sons that I'm like, the world is not an Eggo waffle. It ain't made in 60 seconds. It ain't gonna happen for you like that. You just gotta do your part. You know, and it's like, and when the Smithsonian bought this work, let me tell you, the gallery called me and said, they want to buy 13 drawings. Okay. I was excited, but I was like, You know when I heard back from them? 2 years later. 2 years later. On what happened to be one of the worst days in my life. My grandmother died last year on Father's Day, and my grandmother raised me, crushed my soul. And I was like, Father's Day won't ever be the same. The next morning, they called and were like, oh, we sent the drawings out from the Smithsonian, they paid for them. And I was like, I appreciate you, Grandma, because like, I ain't heard from none of those people for 2 years. And I was like, that was her little parting gift to me to say, you know, let me give you something to believe in. Or let me give you some more motivation to keep going. And I tell people that I'm like, even if these institutions buy your work or they acquire it, it might take forever. It's got to go, some board got to look at it. Somebody else got to look at it. Somebody rich got to buy it and then feel like they want to donate it to get a tax write-off, you know. You just don't know, like, that's why I'm like, you can't look at those things. You got to make. You got to make, and you got to make what's real for you. You know, I make what's important to me. I don't worry about what other people like, what they think, what's on trend. People's like, oh man, you make figurative work, that's on trend. I've been making work for 25 years as figurative. Ain't nobody care about it when I was making it before. I was still making the work that I wanted to make because that was what was feeding my soul. And I remember the time I did question that when I was a younger artist, and I was like, I need to start making this and make this, and because people don't like it, I need to make stuff that people like. And my grandma said, baby, what other people think about you ain't none of your business. You make what work for you. And from that day on, I was like, whatever I make is gonna be the work that I wanna make. It's gonna be the work that I wanna talk about. Whether you like it or not, it's gonna fulfill something in me. And you gotta realize it ain't gonna always be, people ain't gonna always like it. It's just not. As a student, you're gonna have a crit that ain't gonna go your way. And I always tell students, I said, apply what you can apply and let fly everything else. Take notes, record the crit, take in what little piece you wanna take in, but make what's gonna work for you. Because I'm telling you, I've seen people who had amazing crits and nothing else. I've seen people who had horrible crits and they shoot off like a rocket. And I told a student today, I said, what I think about art is when I make it, and it comes from reading this essay about believing and doubting in grad school. Are you doubting the work you're making, or are you believing in it? Because if you don't believe in it, I can't believe in it. And that's what I told them today. I said, make what you believe in, because then I'm going to believe in it. But if you doubt it, I'm going to doubt it, because I know it's not from a place that's real. And even today, even when I juror this show, and printmakers got so many vast things, you know, litho, photolitho, mezzotints, intaglios, dry points, reliefs, linocuts, wood carvings, collagraphs. Like, you can make a million things. So when I got these almost 900 submissions to get down to 50, I was looking at technique, but I was more so looking at context. Okay, is it excellent in the technique first? Yes. But now is it excellent in what it's doing on the other side? And sometimes I'm looking at names, because names mean a lot. Titles mean a lot. I always hate when students be like, this is my painting, Untitled 32. I'm like, because I tell them, if you name something, you care about it. If you give something a title, you love it. You name your children, you name your pets, you name things you care about. Don't just bring this in here and be like, it's Untitled 32. Okay, so now I don't care about it because you don't seem to care about it. If it's a study, I get that, but I'm talking about people bringing in full render paintings with no titles. And I'm like, what is this about? I'm like, it needs to make sense. The artist statement needs to make sense. So when I'm jurying, I look at this excellence in technique, I look at this excellence in context, then I want to read about it. Because now do I believe in this description and in this context you're giving me? Because I'm thinking about, is it just pretty or not? Or is there another level that I want to look at? And also, when I was doing this, I was like, printmaking is already small. And there's a really small part of printmaking that's indigenous or black and brown, and I'm like, I want everybody to have a fair say-so. Like, I want everybody to be represented. So many times I go to conferences about printmaking, I never hear about Catlett, I never hear about Robert Blackburn, I never hear about Brandywine, I never hear about any of these things. You wouldn't even think they exist in the printmaking world. And my thing is, I'm like, I don't want people to be marginalized and eaten out of the canon of printmaking. I want everybody to be represented. Technique, context, who they are, what they're talking about, even what's represented in Texas. I was like overwhelmingly happy to see how many pieces dealt with immigration, indigenous issues. And I was like, these are things that matter, especially if they're going to be placed in Texas. So I was thinking about all those things, thinking about it having a bigger space, thinking about size, thinking about bookmaking. It's a huge part of printmaking is bookmaking. And what I did when I started looking at it, the first thing I did was wipe my memory clean. Like, Ruck, don't go in here and take and choose 50 woodcuts. Because that's what artists tend to do. We just pick everything that look like what we like. And I was like, take your relief carving out of it and just look at it. And just feel how you feel about it. And that was kind of the way I got to the show. And when I walked in there earlier and see it, I was like overwhelmed with how good it was. Because a lot of times when you draw, you're drawing on a computer. You can't scale, so everything is off. So the first thing I was looking at, I was like, oh man, I thought that was bigger. I thought that was smaller, but I was like, but it's good. It's good. It's like, I want people to walk into any show I've tried to juror and feel like their soul been fed, or they've been hugged, or something, or that they've been asked questions, or they leave with a different perspective. And so I'm hoping when everybody gets to see this show and they get a chance to look back at it, that they feel that way. And let me know if you do or not. Now I'm at 6:30.
Thank you, Rashaun. That was an amazing, brilliant, and beautiful talk. You have answered most of the questions I have on my list already. You did a really wonderful job of weaving everything in. So for our audience members here, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Nicole will come around with the microphone, and you can ask your questions. I also have some more coming in, but I have one that I'd like to start with that's from a student, Jerusha. Has social media been a source of inspiration or hindrance in your art?
I wouldn't say a hindrance at all. I would say probably only a hindrance to the fact that I'm not great at it. You know, because like, if you're looking at algorithms and metrics and stuff, you're supposed to be posting like 4 or 5 times a day. I don't think there's nothing interesting in my life enough to be posting anything 5 times a day. I might do like 4 times a week. But I will say like some of the bigger jobs that I've gotten have come through Instagram, believe it or not. I've had a working relationship with HBO. I've done artwork for 3 of their movies, and it came through Instagram. The first one I thought was spam. I was like, I think I literally replied, "Stop playing on my IG." And the guy was like, no, this is real. I'm like, nobody from HBO will reach out to me on IG about doing art for a movie. And I was like, who's the director? And I was like, you tell the director to reach out to me. Funny enough that it was for Black Boy. Oh, no, it was for Native Son that Rashaun Johnson directed. So Rashaun Johnson actually reached out to me and was like, nah, this is for real. We want to use your artwork. I was like, okay, this is Rashaun Johnson, so I believe this now. And me and him have had a relationship since. And so I think it's helped in that way. I just did some artwork for Kevin Hart's new movie on Netflix, Me Time. That came through the same way. It was like, there's a thing called a shopper on IG, which I didn't know, and they literally shop around looking for artists they might want to use in movies. And so I've made a relationship with a shopper and a set designer. And that particular set designer has now put me in like 4 different movies. Because every time he has something, he's like, hey, you want to do this? Or you got something this? I want to use this. Like, those birds first showed up in Native Son on HBO for Rashaun Johnson. So they've been in Random Acts of Flyness, a couple of different shows. I did all the animation work for a documentary on the 69 uprising in Detroit. So it's had its great things. I've met amazing people. Philip Townsend just came in here today, and I was like, hey, I've known you from IG for like 2 years, but we never met. So it's cool sometimes when you actually meet people in real life. And I think it's also funny when people know your handle, because sometimes I'll be walking around, people be like, Rucker Art. I'll be like, yeah and no. Yeah, this is me, but it's just weird how you know people. And I told my girlfriend, I was like, that was Philip Townsend. She was like, fill in the blank. I'm like, yeah. So she knew you from that. So yeah, I don't want to say it's a hindrance. I think students are actually way more equipped to use IG and social media for art than I am, because I'm older. And I think they understand. I still ain't made my first good reel. Like, I feel like y'all really know how to use that stuff already, so like, use it to your advantage.
Any questions from the audience? Anyone have a question?
A lot of your work is like figurative, and then you also did photojournalism. So you're constantly like looking at people's faces, and also like just from your graphite drawings, you're having to spend a lot of time with like these images of like a very specific appearing type of person. So I guess I'm just wondering how that affects the way you view people, like when you're looking at the wrinkles in their skin and like different skin tones, and like literally trying to reproduce it in a drawing, and like you have like these large scale drawings, so you're spending hours and hours of time like with that, like.
So let me tell you something funny. So you saw the picture I showed where I was drawing on the couch on the board. That's how I draw. So if you realize how big that is, I've taught myself how to draw upside down, left, right, because I don't have a big enough table, so I have to turn it to constantly draw. So when I look at people's faces now, I don't really look at their faces, I look at their shapes. I'm like, there's a square here, there's a plane there, there's a circle there, there's a bridge plane here. So I'm really drawing figurative things in the abstract, because I've gotten to the point I'm just looking at shapes. Like even with hands that feel like circles are your knuckles, planes, like I've taught myself how to do that over time. And so it's easier for me to draw upside down and left to right. And it's funny because I was like, oh man, I owe Dr. DeBella some dinner for this, because I remember the first drawing exercise in college I had, and they do this at all schools pretty much, was they give you something to draw upside down. And I was like, I use this every day now. And I think like, I don't mind the time. Like, that's what I love about drawing. Drawing is about affection, and it's about patience, and it's about taking time with a material. And so like, I really get lost in drawings. Like, I don't even hear things sometimes when I'm drawing. I tell people like, I feel closest to God when I'm drawing. Like, my kids be like, Dad, did you hear me? I'll be like, oh no, what'd you say? And it's like, because I've like, I don't know if this sounds crazy, I don't know if anybody felt this, but I feel like sometimes I'm drawing, I'm not even moving the pencil myself. Like, I've gotten that laser focus into it where I feel like I'm having an out of body experience with the, mark making. And so that, and then I feel like photojournalism, like that gave me a better understanding of like how anatomy and things work. But I think what it did mostly for my art is it made me a better storyteller. And what photojournalism gave me was a PhD in humanity. Because if you do that for 20 years, literally one day I'm sitting across from President Obama, and the next day I'm doing a perk walk with somebody who's going to jail. And the next day somebody's house who burned down. And the next day somebody who started a business. And the next day somebody's praying Santa Claus for kids in the urban city. So it's like, it's so different that you get to meet people from all walks of life. I met a guy who was building a UFO in his garage, and I was like, I would have never met this guy if I would not been a photojournalist. And I was like, the first thing I said was, I know you're not married because you spent $200,000 building this UFO in your garage, or you don't have a significant partner or other, because he had cashed out his 401k to build a Jetsons saucer. But I was also so glad inside that I was a photojournalist, because I'm like, wait till people wake up and see a 60-year-old black man inside a Jetsons car in his garage on the front page of the newspaper. This is gonna be glorious. So yeah, it just taught me how to deal with humanity.
Thank you.
I'm going to kind of condense two questions. One's from a student and one's from the chat, because they're both in some ways about mental health. But from the chat, when did you start to become aware of the oppressions that you and your family face due to racism? And then I kind of want to pair that with this question: what inspired your art about mental health, and how do you approach it? What goals do you have, and are you ever worried people will find it disturbing?
I'll do the second one first. So I started doing more about mental health when like I said, I have a 15-year-old son who has autism. He was diagnosed when he was 18 months old. So I knew quite early, and back, I would say, being a photojournalist is what solved that puzzle. I went to do a story on a family, and I spent a week with them that had a son that had autism that was 4 years old. And at the time I was married, and I came home and I said, our son has autism. She was like, don't say that, you don't know that. I said, I just spent a week with a kid with the exact same issues. And she was like, I don't believe you. And I called the hospital. One time I ever used my job, I said, I want to get an appointment with a pediatric neurologist. They said, we 8 months out. I said, I can't wait that long. I called a public relations person at the hospital that I knew well. I said, Amy, I ain't never asked you for nothing in the world. I think my son has autism. I can't get into the appointment. She said, put him in the car, come right now, bring him. And she just walked me into the neurologist's office and was like, this is my friend, I need you to give him this test. 30 minutes later, the doctor was like, your son has autism, here's a pamphlet, Godspeed. Like, that's literally how it happened, and that's how I started thinking about it in my art. And what I don't tell people a lot about, like, I also chose the pigeon because the pigeon is representative of my son. Because the pigeon is something that's seen but not adored, that appears normal but doesn't get the empathy it deserves. But also, like a pigeon, if you see it from far away, it's just gray or black or white. But if you ever get close to a pigeon, you see that it's purple and green and pink and iridescent, and it has its own beauty. And so I quietly make pigeons because they're about him. And when did I first have a issue and know about being Black? That was probably right from the jump. As soon as I could figure it out, because when you're young and you're Black, there's always these warnings from your family constantly. Don't do this, don't do that, don't go over here, don't go over there, there's like some kind of like beacon that they're telling you, like, don't go to this neighborhood, don't do that. And so that was kind of very like right, probably from like 5 or 6 years old. And I told somebody, I said, one of the biggest wake-up calls you have as a Black or brown person is at some point officer friendly at school turns into your worst enemy. Because when you come to school, you're like, officer friendly and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you're 6'1" and you're 13 or 14 and you're getting accosted. And so you kind of learn like right away. And I think you have to, because there's a sense of urgency. Like, I think my parents and grandparents were try to keep you alive by telling you this. They try to teach you, all these, like, all the manners of the world, all this. Like, I just heard Derek Forger speaking. He said, I did everything short of wearing an ascot down the street not to get in trouble. And he was like, and that don't even work. And so I think it's just a thing that happens like in Black and brown communities, like very instantaneously, that something else is afoot.
We have another question from Julie. You draw and print individually. However, when you do installation pieces, you work with others. How is this for you to collaborate in this way? And we were talking earlier about printmaking too, and that being a collaborative process.
Yeah, so what you see here is my current show that's up at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, and it's images of my family that I took over the past year and put them on 6-foot church fans, and I turned the gallery into a church. And so the church, the pews have like usher gloves and collection plates and tambourines, and the show is called Relief from the Heat. I think I just learned how to work with people because I realized, like, I'm never gonna know everything. Like, I drew this church fan 3 years ago, and I was like, how in the world am I gonna ever make a 6-foot church fan that's archival, that can hold up for 100 years? And I literally had to seek out some people, and I sought out some people, and they were like, we can do it in dye bond, and we can UV coat it, and these type of coatings, and it'll hold up. And then I had the top of the fan. I was like, well, what about the handle? Then I found a carpenter, and he was like, oh, I can make this out of birch wood, and we can put veneer on it, and we can do this. Because I don't know how to do that. And I don't have time to learn how to be a carpenter. And I think a lot of times as artists, we're so afraid to let go of control. And I think the first step of that was printmaking, because I was telling Terry earlier, I made an 8-foot lino cut for Mercedes-Benz last year. I didn't know how to print that. I had to like seek out somebody who could print it. And it was like, so you have to kind of realize sometimes in order to get what you need to get, you got to let go and trust somebody else to help you bring it to fruition. And I think you also get somebody just working with other creatives. I enjoyed like working with the two people, and it was like, it was like a master class for me. I'm like watching them cut dye bond and do this and do that. And like, I don't know how many little fans we made. I ended up giving the little fans to like my grandparents and uncles and aunts and whoever. And so I think you just got to let go at some point and like, to have your vision.
So I'm just going to end with one last question. This is also from a student. How do you promote your artwork? And do you have any advice for young artists trying to go down the same path as you?
I don't know if I really promote it well, though. Look, you see my girlfriend shaking her head. she be trying to build reels for me and everything. I be like, I just kind of post what I'm doing, post process stuff. I like to post little DIY printmaking just to show people you can do it at home. Like I said, I think younger artists have like such an advantage with social media because they know how to use it well, and I don't. I've seen young artists cultivate 100,000 followers like overnight just because they know how to play with the algorithms and all that stuff. And so my biggest promotion is probably like with the little stuff that I post. I do work with Charlie James Gallery in LA, Namdi Contemporary in Miami, and M Contemporary in Detroit. They do a lot of stuff, like they do their own social stuff, they post stuff, they do a lot of stuff on Artsy. Maybe I'm just old school, like, and I feel like I want to promote it, but not to a point where I'm like asking you to buy it and love it. Like, I want you to come to it on your own. You know, like sometimes the gallery will be like, I got this buyer on the hook, but they want to talk to you. And I'm like, I want them to just want to buy it. I don't want to talk people into buying the work. Like, I've been like that. I remember a lady bought a large drawing for me. It was like 6-foot drawing. She had it for like a month. She called a gallery and she was like, oh, I don't know if I'm in love with this anymore. I want to bring it back. And they were like, well, you paid for it. I was like, no. Give her the check back, give her the money back, and tell her to bring the piece back. And somebody bought it like 2 weeks later. I was like, I want it to be in a place where it's loved. And so I don't know if I promote it the best I could, but I just kind of do those things. Like, if it don't seduce you, I don't want you to have it. Because I want you to live with it. I don't want you to buy it because you want to flip it or put it in an auction 3 years later. I want you to be able to live with it. I want it to have a legacy in your home, like it's got a legacy in my life. But I definitely think for younger artists, like, I have so many avenues. So many avenues, and you already, because you're native to technology. Like, my sons know how to use everything because they grew up with a screen. And because I didn't, it doesn't feel like natural to me in most ways. I mean, I only got Facebook so I can talk to my mama and my grandma. I mean, and they can keep up with what I'm doing. And they still don't know what I'm doing when I post it. My grandma comes, I seen you had something down there at the gallery, what's going on? You know, it's like, it's just there for people. It's just there for family to look at and enjoy and, you know, take advantage of all the things that you have as young people. I mean, y'all got NFT, y'all got all kinds of stuff to do with art that I didn't have access, or people my age didn't. So I would say run with it as far as you can go.
I get just a comment just about what you're saying, and I think thinking about what you've just been talking about, there is a difference between promoting your art and putting it out there.
I just put it out there.
And just putting it out there is a very different thing, and maybe, I don't know, promoting is more of an active way, and it gets into the market, it gets into that element. So
and I always tell young artists before we go, I say, it's a difference between being hot on the market and making good work. I said, it's a big difference. I said, because you can go to those catalogs from the Whitney Biannual and you can look 2 years later, you will never know that person again. Just make good work. Don't worry about being hot on the market, because it's just like clothes. One day your paintings won't be liked. That's why I say make what you love, because people, you know, the art world is fickle. It changes overnight. Tomorrow it'll be something else. Right now, everybody in grad school is painting pink. Next year, there'll be some other color. Just make what's true to you. Live in that space.
Please join me in thanking Rashaun for his great talk tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.